Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about all of the eyeshadow palettes that are currently on the chopping block out of my collection. These are the eyeshadow palettes that if I had to declutter some palettes out of my collection, these are the ones that I would look at. They're just palettes that either I'm not really vibing with the formula or I'm not really reaching for the color story of. Doesn't mean they're necessarily bad palettes. It's just for one reason or another, I don't find myself gravitating toward them in my collection. And I'm trying to figure out what to do because I don't just want to declutter all of them. I feel like I want to give at least some of them the benefit of the doubt and try them again because there are some here that I haven't used very much that I probably need to use a bit more to know for sure if I want to declutter them. But there are also some here that I've used a ton that are just getting really, really old in my collection. If you missed my full collection declutter videos, I will have those linked in the description box below because the rest of my collection has been decluttered. I've actually physically gotten rid of things that are expired or passed things along that I'm not using to people who could get more use out of them. It's just my eyeshadow palettes that I'm being a little bit precious about because they are my babies. I do love my eyeshadow palettes and I love eyeshadow and trying all different kinds of palettes and formulas and things like that. So I did make the decision not to declutter any of my palettes in the full collection declutter. So as I move through these, I would love to hear from you in the comments about your thoughts and ideas about what I should do. I'm thinking about panning projects for next year if I want to do like a palettes on the chopping block series where I try to use every shade and all of these palettes before making the decision about whether or not to declutter them. I'm trying to make some decisions about a pan that palette for next year or potentially a seasonal pan that palette. I heard It's Just Steph pitch that idea of having a pan that palette that you use for the first few months and then switch to another one and just try to hit as many pans as you can per season. So yeah, I'm going to show you all of the palettes that are on the chopping block and let me know what you think I should do. This is a fun interactive video where all of you make my life decisions for me. So I'm going to start with these. All four of these ColourPop quads. They're from the astrology collection that ColourPop did. So I've got Never Tore Us Apart, I've got Pisces in the Sky, Like a Virgo, and Tender Loving Cancer. I don't tend to reach for these generally. It's not like a conscious thing that I'm purposefully not reaching for them. It's just not a natural gravitation toward quads for the most part. I think the quality of these is generally good and I like a lot of the color stories. There's just something about them that makes me just want to leave them in my drawer and reach for other things. This one is the Never Tore Us Apart quad, so I got it mainly for this deep green matte shade, and then there's a really pretty kind of duochrome green to gold here that pairs really well with this brown, and then there's like a lighter gold shimmer. This quad though is very reminiscent of the Natasha Denona Mini Gold palette and all of the other palettes I have in my collection at this point with this kind of deep green shade, which is kind of, I don't know, it makes it a little bit redundant feeling, even though I like the idea of having this color story in one compact little quad. Pisces in the Sky is this blue. There's two blue shimmer shades and then there's two neutral kind of brown tan shades. This shade right here is really pretty. It's like an icy sort of blue to brown duochrome, but it takes quite a bit of building up to get it to show up on the eyes, and same with the mattes. They're fine, but they take a lot of building to show up on the eyes. And I never ever reach for this blue shade, which is like the star of the palette. So yeah, I don't know. I like the duochrome. I think it's cool, but I feel like there's probably a duochrome shade that's closer to this that's a little bit better quality and that shows up better on the eyes. So not really one that I'm reaching for. And then it's basically the same story with Tender Loving Cancer and Like a Virgo. These are very similar in color story, but they're a little bit different. So they each have on the bottom row a deeper matte and a lighter matte, and then on the top row they have duochrome, pretty shades, But yeah, I don't know. I don't know why I don't reach for these. They're cute and they're little. They don't take up a ton of space, so I don't feel like I need to immediately get rid of them, but I do feel like I could use some structured motivation to reach for them, whether that's putting them in a project or just trying to use every shade again to remind myself if I actually like it or not. Sticking with ColourPop, I think this is going to be a shock to a lot of you, but I have been considering decluttering my Star Wars Mandalorian palette. I know. I know. It is a fan favorite from so many people, and I was so excited about this palette. I was so excited about this color story. And I think what's happening in this palette just comes down to tones. So a lot of the green shimmers that go with the green mattes are really light and they're really icy and they're almost cool toned, which you wouldn't think of when you look at a green palette like this. I pretty much never reach for these neutrals here because I have 1,000 matte neutral browns and tan shades. So I'm mainly looking at the greens when I dip into this palette, and they're just not my perfect tones of green. I love the saginess of it in theory, but there's something about it on me. I don't tend to like really cool toned shades on my eyes. The last few times I've done looks with this palette, I haven't loved the results, and I think it comes down to the tones and how they play with my skin tone. I feel like it can just make me look a little bit washed out. So I don't know, maybe it's something where I can pair some of these shades with some of the other greens that I have in my collection to warm things up a little bit. Pick and choose from some of the shimmers rather than trying to just dip into this palette to make one look out of it. I really want to like this palette. I don't know why the looks that I'm creating from it are not making me happy. Even the green eyeshadow look I have on today, the shimmer across my lid is a little bit more cool toned, but I feel like overall the look comes across a little bit warmer and kind of murkier and swampier, if you will, which is really the kind of green look that I feel the most comfortable in. So I don't know, what do I do here? Let me know. There are a couple of BH Cosmetics palettes on the chopping block. I love the quality of BH Cosmetics, and when I found out that they were being bought out, I guess it was last year, beginning of last year, the end of the year before, I was on a mission to pick up as many of their palettes as I could in TJ Maxx and Marshalls because we didn't know if these palettes were coming back, and I just heard such great things about the quality. Tried like the avocado toast palette, the blueberry muffin palette. Still love those palettes so much, and the quality I fell in love with. So I was just kind of collecting all the BH Cosmetics palettes that I could find at the time. And I ended up with some palettes that I'm not like in love with the color story of. One of which is the Hangin' in Hawaii palette. There's nothing wrong with these shadows. It's still that same beautiful BH Cosmetics quality. This palette is just so repetitive. I mean, the differences between these three shimmers are so minimal. They look pretty much the exact same on the eyes. It's the same with all of these tan matte shades. They translate the exact same on the eyes. And I'm not a huge fan of like peachy corally pink tones on myself. So when I'm reaching into this palette, I'm generally just doing the same kind of look, which is one of these medium tan shades through the crease, one of these lighter shimmers all over the lid, and one of the deeper brown shades to deepen things up or to use as a liner. Is it worth keeping an entire palette to just do that kind of a look? I'm not sure, because I have those shades a few times over in my eyeshadow palette collection now, and I'm not really reaching for the peaches and the corals, which, you know, that's like half the palette. So I just wish there was a little more variation in this palette. I feel like maybe there's somebody who could get a lot more use out of this than I am getting out of it, but at the same time, I do use it every once in a while, so this one is definitely on the chopping block. And then I've also got the Low Key Love You palette and the Optimistic AF palette. Again, nothing wrong with the quality of these. It's still the same amazing BH Cosmetics quality. But this one, it's kind of the same story. Like, I'm not in love with these reds, pinks, and peaches on myself. So when I'm dipping into this palette, I'm dipping into like these 4 shades. I've got a pan in the lid setting shade, and the reds and peaches I'm not really touching. So yeah, I just don't know. Is it worth keeping this whole palette for just those few shades that I'm reaching for that I have in other palettes? I'm not sure. And then the Optimistic AF palette. This one is very warm toned, so I can't say anything about the warmth of the shades themselves, but they're candy corn colors. They're not wearable neutral warm shades as much as they are a bright yellow, a bright orange, a bright red, and everything in between. So I'm not really reaching for this kind of a color story all that often. It's fun for a pumpkin spice look or a Halloween look, or if I wanted to do like a sunrise look every once in a while. But again, the color story as a whole is just not, I'm not gravitating toward it. So I don't know, do I challenge myself and try to go for these shades more? Or do I pass it on down the line? Let me know your thoughts. On that note, I've also got the Glamlight and Frosted Flakes palette on the chopping block. Love Glamlight quality. I think it's great. I found this one at TJ Maxx, so it's a similar story. It was like once I found out how much I liked Glamlight's formula, I went on a hunt for as many discounted Glamlight palettes as I could find. And I'm really trying to break that habit because I end up with palettes that I'm not using as much just to feel like I'm collecting, you know, palettes from a brand, when I should really just enjoy the 1 or 2 palettes that I have from the brand in the first place and not feel like I have to collect a bunch of their palettes. This is a really fun color story, but it's not one that I see myself using. I've only used this 2 or 3 times though. So part of me thinks I just haven't used it enough. I haven't gotten comfortable enough with the color story and I should challenge myself to use it some more. But it's bright oranges and it's bright blues, and those are just shades that I wear once in a blue moon. You know what I mean? So there's nothing wrong with the palette. The quality is great. I think the shades are beautiful. They're just not shades that I'm reaching for all that often. And then in the same vein, we have the Glamlight Icy Cherry palette. I thought that of all my Glamlight palettes, this one's quality was not quite my favorite, but I think it's just down to the color story and the kinds of shades in here. I think they're really difficult shades to formulate, and they're also shades that I don't love on myself. Again, this is one that I've only dipped in a handful of times, and I still haven't used this bottom row, which I feel like is the kinds of reds and pinks that I would like the most on myself. So maybe I need to give those a try before I decide what to do about this palette. But overall, I don't know, I just felt like I needed more reds and pinks in my eyeshadow collection, only to then realize that I don't actually love the way pink eyeshadow looks on me. And there were a couple of shades in here that I felt like were super flaky and piecey and hard to work with. So this is one that I don't see myself reaching for all that often. Might be worth it to keep in my arsenal just for when I do want a pink or a red look, but I'm not 100% sure where I stand with this palette. So it's on the chopping block. And last but not least, I've got my 2 oldest palettes in my eyeshadow palette collection. First is this Wet n Wild Color Icon palette in my Glamour Squad. My lid is broken on this one because it's that cheap Wet n Wild packaging. And this is supposed to be a color story dupe for the Anastasia Beverly Hills Soft Glam palette. And I have the Soft Glam palette. So part of me thinks, why do I want a duplicate color story? It's basically like having the same palette twice, with the exception of the shimmers in here, which are not my favorite formula. I'm not a huge fan of the Wet n Wild shimmers. They're not shimmery or impactful. They're kind of hard to build up on the lid, and yeah. But the mattes are phenomenal. I've got 1 pan in this palette. This is a palette I could see trying to pan next year sometime because I feel like I could hit a few pans in these mattes in particular. But it's also like, I literally have the Anastasia palette that this one is based on, and this is so old in my collection. Do I need to keep it? The packaging's broken, you know what I mean? So this one's on the chopping block. And then the other one is also so old. This is the Smashbox Cover Shot Major Metals Eye Palette. They obviously don't make this anymore, although I think they still do make the Smashbox Cover Shot palettes. This is an all shimmer palette, which is something that I'm not typically reaching for. I'm usually reaching for a palette that has all the shades that I would need for a look. The shimmers are beautiful though. They are a really nice shimmer formula. They're very molten, impactful, and sparkly on the eyes, but I feel like I've got a lot of bronze shimmers. I've got a lot of gold shimmers in my collection. I'm not typically reaching for shades that are this deep if I'm going for a shimmer. And the two in the middle, the cranberry and the taupe, are also just shades that I'm not reaching for very often. I think the formula of these are still good, even though this is really old in my collection. I swatched these recently and they went on beautifully, so maybe another one that I could pan in the new year, but I would be interested to hear your thoughts. So those are all of the palettes that I have on the chopping block. Again, I'm not getting rid of any of these just yet, but I am trying to think of projects or just fun ways I can try to get some more use out of them to, number one, get some more use out of them, but also to help me really make my decision about whether or not I want to keep them in my collection. Because I don't want to declutter stuff just for the sake of decluttering stuff, but I also don't want to keep stuff just for the sake of keeping stuff. Let me know your thoughts. I feel like we've got some good contenders for some palettes to try and hit pan on next year. I'm thinking about whether or not I want to do a no pan left behind style project next year, or just a project that revolves around these palettes on the chopping block in some way. But I would love to hear from you down in the comments below if you have any ideas for me. Thank you so much for watching today. Please give the video a like if you liked it, and I will hope to see you in my next one. Bye!